Hi, the goal of this video is to talk about some of the commands we've covered so far in the Intro to Database course. So in the course, really what we've looked at so far are two main types of commands. We've looked at commands that affect table structure, right? So these are the commands that allow us either to create or modify a table. And again, a table is there to store data, structured data. So under the commands that sort of structure our tables, we have things like create database, which we don't use a lot because our DreamHost account doesn't allow you to create new databases. We use create table. Now that one we've used extensively, and the idea with create table is that again we can create a new table. We can give it a name, we can create all the fields, we can define all the columns, and we'll go into that in a little bit of detail in this video. The next command we have here is drop table. So if we should ever want to just remove a table completely from our data set, we can use drop table. And then the last one, which we haven't discussed too much in the course yet, is alter table. And the idea there is if you have an existing table with existing data set in it, imagine having hundreds of thousands of rows of customer data, and we decided that we wanted to add a new field or rename an existing field, then we would alter the table because we wouldn't want to drop it and create a new table. We would lose all of our existing data. Instead, what we do is we would alter the table. So let's take a look at using some of these commands that allow us to structure tables. Specifically, let's look at the create table command. Now, one of the challenges that people will face, especially when you're on the industry side, is you're asked to achieve a task, but you don't have the same structured amount of information as you do in the classroom. So to do that, to work around that problem, Google's going to be your best friend. And for MySQL, what I really recommend is you start all your queries the exact same way. You start it with MySQL. And then you think about what is it I want my command, or what is it I'm trying to achieve. So if we're going to create a new table, then I would say create table. Or if I didn't even know what the command specifically was, that maybe build table, right? I can think about that, and you know, you're still going to get things that match. And what I really like is the main hits that come up at this point with Google searches is you're going to see dev.mysql.com, and those are your developer pages. And you'll also see some additional supporting type things like W3 schools and tutorials point and whatnot. I'm going to show you how to review the developer pages, but that doesn't mean that these other resources aren't good resources. And in fact, a lot of times some of the W3 schools or other online content does a better job giving you examples of how to use the commands. So let's look at create table. So as this opens up, what you'll see here is here's the syntax for create a table. And the big thing to understand is in the developer pages, anything that's in a square bracket, those are optional commands. So for example here, if I were to read this, I can kind of look past those optional things. So I can see the command is create table and give it a table name. And if I look at that in practice, here's an example, create table, and I give it a name. And then we have some round brackets, and it says the create definition. So because there's so many different things that could happen with create definition, they've sort of pushed this down a bit. So if I come down here, I can see here's the create definition area, and what you do is you give the column a name and then you give it a definition. So the names can be anything you like. It just has to include preferably lowercase letter to start, and there can't be any spaces or special characters in it. But otherwise, the naming conventions are pretty relaxed. And then for column definition, let's go down here to what is a column definition. Well, you need to put in a data type, and then they've specified here's all the different data types that are available to you. And then you have a bunch of optional parameters, like it can be not null, or it cannot be null, or it has to be null. You can give it default values. You can make it auto-incrementing if it's an integer. You can add keys, like primary keys and whatnot, which we'll get to later in the course. The big thing is is really how to read this information, because once you understand how to read it, then you can use it for any command. Like, we've never covered alter table in the class yet, but now we can go here and you can go, okay, well, alter table, and you give your table name, and then you could look up what are the specifications. So it can add columns, add constraints, you can add text, you can alter, you can change columns. All these things are available to you, and you know how to read them. So let's look at this. So we're going to create a table here called Texas Motor Speedway, and the idea here is it's going to store all the race information that happened at this. I guess they're NASCAR events that have happened at this this racetrack. So we have a few fields. One of them is the day the race happened. You see here I chose a date format instead of varchar. Varchar is a string, and a lot of people instinctively would say just make it a string to represent the date. The problem is that a string is just a string, so I could put my name in there, I could put a date in there, I could put in a sentence, right? It doesn't confine us to being valid dates. So if we make it a date field, it forces it to be a valid date, so that improves the data integrity within our table. The other thing that it'll do for us is now it'll open up a whole world of date functions. So again, if I go back here, if I say MySQL date, and then I can look at the date and time functions. If it's stored as a date, I have all of these wonderful features available to me, right? So I can use any of those. So for example, I could say, well, what's the month name that the race was in, or what was the day name, right? Do we normally host them on Saturdays, or do we normally host the race on Mondays? I'd be able to see all that information with just one use of one command. It's really powerful. So let's run this in. And then the next command that we have here, so that was create table. We can drop a table. So if for some reason I wanted to get rid of this table, the command syntax is going to be drop table and then the table name. I've added in if exists, just in the case that the table doesn't exist, this won't error out. So if I want to run that, I can run it, and again, make sure that the table is removed. You can see green checkbox. So let's put the table in, and then the next thing we want to look at is alter table. Actually, before we alter the table, let's insert some values. So I've prepared some existing values to be put in our table. So let's look at our table here. So I say select star from Texas Motor Speedway. So here I can see I have my race day, race name, whoops, the winner, the start position, make of the cars, and how many times the lead changed hands. And that's exactly the same as what we could do in Excel. The big difference with Excel is, although I could have this information, these aren't formally date objects, right? So I could actually add in one like Daffy Duck, and it's the Looney Tunes 500. It would accept the date as Daffy Duck. So it's not quite as strong of a rule set as we have with MySQL. Now, if I wanted to alter the table, maybe I didn't want to have this called make. Maybe it's a little more instructive or intuitive for people to have this called something like manufacturer. So let's just open a new create tab and work from that. Okay. So if I wanted to change the name of that, then I'm going to think, okay, I need to alter the table, right? So let's go back to our alter table. Oops. There we go. Okay. So here I can see it's the word alter and the word table, and then I give a table name. I'm going to say alter table . And then it says put in whatever your alter specification is. So in this case, I want to change the column. So I go down, oh, here's change. So if I want to use change, then I have to use the old column name and then give it a new name, and I have to give it a definition. Okay, so let's do that. So change column make to manufacturer, and let's just make that a varchar of 30. Okay. So I have my old name, my new name, and the new data type. So let's run that in. And what it says here is, here's the command. I got a green check. It says 28 rows are affected, and it looks like everything's good. So now if I go back and I run, if I run my select star, I can see that column is now called manufacturer instead of make. So that can be really handy. So we've quickly looked at create table and how to find the structure of that command in the MySQL developer pages. We've looked at drop table, and we gave a simple example there for alter table. We've run in commands using insert, and now we have update and delete. So let's look at update. Maybe there's a mistake in the data that I entered. For example, what if the start position for Elliot Sadler here was actually 20 instead of 19? So if we want to change that, really what we need to do is first create a query so that we have a way to uniquely identify that particular item. Now, when we get later in the course, we're going to talk about key fields and how that can make a big difference on uniquely identifying things. But for now, let's see if we can do it with just the dates and whatnot. So I'm going to say select star. So select all the columns from this table where, and I'm going to try using the date field. So where race day equals 2004. So if I do that, I get one record returned. Well, this is a good thing. Now, if there had been multiple races that day, then that wouldn't be a good search term. But because there's one result, I now know that I can uniquely identify that record. So I'm going to say update table Texas Motor Speedway, and set. Sorry, I don't think I need a table there. Set, and I'm going to say the field is called start position, equal to 20. And let's change this car. Maybe we can even do two things here, right? So we'll say the manufacturer equals Chevrolet, where, and I like to, because I know this works, I like to actually just copy and paste it rather than run the risk of making a mistake. So now I can update that table. Whoop. It says I'm in safe update mode. So in order to work past that, I'm going to need this command here. So let's put that in. So safe update mode is there to protect the integrity of the database. In this case, to turn it off, or I'm going to set this parameter, SQL safe updates, to 0, which is its lowest security level. So I run that, it says that that's okay. Now I'm going to run in my command, and it says it was updated. So let's go back now and look at, and here we've updated this record. So his start position has changed from 19 to 20, and I believe it was a Ford before, and now it's Chevrolet. So we were able to update a specific record. Now, one of the risks with update is if you don't have a good where clause, you can actually really impact the integrity of the data. So for example, if I run this and I don't use the where clause at all, I run it, it says, oh, that's fine. 27 rows were affected. Sorry, 28 were changed. So now, when I look at my data, every car started in position 20, and every manufacturer is a Chevy. So you have to be really careful when you're using update and delete. Okay, so as I was saying, the in this case we've overridden all the valid data. So we can't really do too many interesting select statements because we have a lot of invalid data in here. So what I'm going to do is in this case, and you can, if you were in a production database on the industry side, really what you'd be doing at this point would be you would run to the IT department and beg for them to restore the database to the last update. You can also do reversion. You can set up special parameters on your database so that you can undo the last command. The way we have this set up right now, that's not possible. So in this case, what we'll do is I'm going to drop the table, and then I'm going to re-add the information. So let's go back to this file. So I'm going to drop it, create it, and then insert my data again so that I have some valid data. And you may have noticed in the video, sometimes I'll go here to the lightning bolt, which says, it'll execute the selected portion of the script, or everything if there's no selection. But sometimes it looks like it just magically runs. And what I'm doing is I'm holding down the Control key, the Shift key, and hitting Enter. And I just did it there, and you can see it ran in all the scripts for us. So it's just a little shortcut for some people that like to do things quicker. So, so let's take a look at where we're at. So far in the video we've talked about, here's all the commands that alter this or can affect the structure of a table, and here's all the commands that really affect the contents of the table. We've looked at the insert command, and the structure there is really quite simple. It's insert into, and you give your table name. If you have only specific columns that you want to enter information into, you can specify those. So for example, if I didn't know all the data, I might say race day, winner, start position. Maybe that's all the data that I knew. I could say values. So the race day, make it today. The winner, I think Fred Flintstone is a great name for a race driver. And his start position, let's say it was 76. So he had a big comeback win. So if I do this, what I'm doing is I'm saying insert into this table in these columns the following values, right? So the date, in this case the winner, and the start position. So if I say insert, it goes in. And if I select, if I do my select, and I scroll to the bottom of my table, I can see, sure enough, here's the record that we just added, right? Another way that you can insert data is you can say insert into, and if you know all of the columns and you want to add data to all of the columns, you actually don't need to specify this piece here. You can just write the word values, and you can put in the information. So if we had 2 races, I guess, on that day, and we'll call it the Looney Tunes 500, and the winner could be Bugs Bunny. The Wild and Wacky. Whoop. Now here's an interesting thing. So you can see we use single quotes. So if I wanted to have it actually say a single quote, I have to escape that character, right? So I'm going to use this backslash to show that it's part of my string. That's the Wild and Wacky. That's and the lead change to say 54 times. So if I want to fill in every column, I don't need to specify the column information. I can just write the word values. If I run that in, so now when I look, I can see all of the 2 records that I've just added. So that's the insert command. We've looked at the update command already, where we could update certain aspect of our data. And remember, the big risk there is if we don't have a proper where clause, we could accidentally update all of the records, or we could update records that we didn't intend to update. Let's look at the delete clause. So if I wanted to get rid of this Fred Flintstone value, again, if I go back to my friend Google, and I say MySQL delete, see how it says delete row? That's what we want to do here, right? If we want to get rid of one of those, we want to delete the row. Let's let that bring that up. In here, it says delete, and you can see one of the optional parameters here is low priority. Now, the reason you might do that is if you were in a production database with, hundreds of thousands or millions of rows of data, and you wanted to delete certain records for whatever reason, that could put a load on the actual server. So you could put it as low priority, which means that it'll only get rid of those records when the processor has time. It'll allow other things that are higher priority to be done first. Okay, but again, square brackets indicate that it's optional. So we're going to delete from the table, and then we have a where condition, and I would argue that you should always have a where condition. If you don't, you're going to remove all the records, and you can actually limit how many rows get deleted. So let's say there was like 5 records that met some condition. You could limit it to say 4, right? So it doesn't delete all of them, it'll delete all but 1. So in this case, let's find a way to uniquely identify the Fred Flintstone one. So again, I'm going to start with a query to figure out if I can uniquely identify this row, this record. In this case, I can. So now I can say delete from and then my where condition I'm going to take from here because I know that works. The most common mistake that I see is people always seem to want to put a little asterisk in there because it looks so similar to the select from table. But with delete, you can't delete certain columns. You can only delete the entire record. So there's no value of putting in which columns to delete, and that's why the command's structured the way it is. So we delete it. I look down. I got the checkbox that says one row was affected. If I look through my data, I no longer have that Fred Flintstone in there. Okay, so that's great. We've looked at insert, update, delete. Now, one of the most valuable things, you have information in your table. The real value in a database administrator is getting the information out of that table. Because why else would you store it? You're storing it so that you can get the information out and make useful business decisions as a result. So let's look at our select statements. So the concept here is we're going to select and we're going to provide the column names that we want. So race day, right? So if I do that, I've specified all of the columns in the order that I'd like to see them. So for example, if I wanted to put make at the front, right? So right now make's over here. If I run this query now, I'm going to get the same information, but it puts make in the first column and then race day, race name. Now the reason that sometimes you'll see select star from, this is just a short form to say return all of the columns, right? So in this case, I explicitly stated what the columns were. Here I said just give me all the columns. And if I run them, I'm going to get them in the order that they're specified in our table. So what are some useful things we might want to do with this? So one thing might be, we might want to say, well, who who's had the most wins at this particular racetrack. So in order to do that, we'd actually have to look through our winner category here, and we see, well, Bugs Bunny's won once. It looks like Carl 1, 2, 3 times. And you can keep going through and count up the people. This is a very manual process. Now, we only have 28 records in this, or 29 records in this database. If we had hundreds of thousands of records, doing something like this would be prohibitively long, and the data would always be stale. So what we need is a way that we can aggregate this information together really quickly and provide useful information. So the way to do that, and the way that I'll always recommend building your select statements, is start small and then add one parameter at a time to make sure that your data keeps making sense as you go along. So who won the most at this track? So the first thing I like to do is I like to select, whoops, I like to start with just looking at my data. Now, in this case, in order for me to make any sense of this, I really have to sort it based on the winner, right? And then I need to, in my head, I'm grouping the drivers together and counting them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take that exact same query, but because I said I had to group it, I'm going to use this group by winner. So what this will do, if I run it now, see how instead of 29 rows, now I have 19 rows. And what it'll do is it'll group all of the races based on the particular winner. So I won't have any duplicate winners, right? When I sort this, each name is only in here once. And although we can't see it, what it's doing is, I believe Carl had 3 wins, right? So it would actually have, inside of MySQL, it would have Samsung 500, and then it would have the other races that he's won listed. We're just only seeing the first row returned. So what we can do here is we can actually say, well, select, and let's count the number of race names and the winner. Right? So maybe I don't care about the make of their car, their start position, or any of that stuff, but let's count the number of races that they've won and show their name grouped by their name. So if I run this now, all of a sudden I can see how many wins. Bugs Bunny had 1, Carl had 3, right? And I can go through, and if I clicked on these, I could sort them somewhat, right? So here Jimmy Johnson's at the top. So if I wanted to put some order to this, well, I could evolve this a little bit more, and I could say, well, order by column 1. I could also say order by count race name, but I'm going to say order by 1, and by default the order by command is ascending, so that means it starts small and goes big. The reverse of that is descending, so I start big and I go small. The easiest trick I have for remembering ascending and descending is I think of stairs in an apartment building. If I'm on the top floor, so the floor is the highest number, and then I'm going to descend down the stairs to a lower number floor, right? Same idea. So I'm going to put in here that it's descending. Okay, so now I can see the number of wins each person's had. And if I want to make it a little prettier, I can say as, and say number of wins. If I run it again, now instead of saying count bracket race name, which is maybe not the cleanest looking thing, I can say number of wins and the winner's name. Right? So I have a nice list, a prioritized list of the winners. So this is a really helpful way to start getting information out of our table. So when we look at that, it almost seems like magic, right? We were able to figure out in a heartbeat the number of wins each person had. What's really happening under the hood? It's really hard to use the group by command if you don't understand how it's really working. So to look at that, I'm going to look at Excel here. So this was our original data that was in Excel, right? So we've when we use group by, really what we're saying is, sort it based on the winner. So I'm gonna say here, data sort based on the winner name, right? So now I can see, okay, Carl Carl won 3 times, Denny won twice, Jimmy Johnson won 4 times. So to make this a little clearer, I've added into this kind of color-coded system here. So here you can see Carl won 3 different races. Now when we run the command without the count, so let's go back to this one here, where we just grouped it by the winner. And what we saw was Carl had won the Samsung 500. So if I go back here, what it's doing is it's returning just that first row, right? It's showing there's the winner, the Samsung 500. We don't get to see the Dickies 500 or the other Dickies 500. You wanted to guess 2 different years. We're only seeing that first row returned. So that's where it can be misleading. But if we do it with count, then what it'll do is actually it will look at that column and say how many records are in here, and it'll say 3. So that's where we get the 3 from. Or if we go down to Jimmy Johnson, there's 4 names in here, so it says 4. So when we do the next one there, where it says count the race names, that's where we're getting these unique things. And then all we did is we ordered it based on the number of wins. So let's look at a similar type of thing with the days of the week. So what day of the week are races hosted on? So again, let's start with an interesting or a simple query. So I'm going to say select star from Texas Motor Speedway, and here's all the days that the races were held on, and those are dates. Now if I were to store those as varchars and I wanted to figure out are these races held on Saturday or Sunday or Friday, I'd have to actually go look up in a calendar every single one of those dates. But because I haven't stored them as a string, I stored them as a date, I can do actually some useful information on them. So for example, I could take my simple little query here, and let's say return the race day and the race name. Okay. So if I just wanted those 2 columns, I could actually go here and say, well, what's the day name for that field? So it will look at that date and it'll run this function called day name, which returns the day of the week. So let's look at that. If I do this, I can see the races are mostly on Sunday, but there's the odd Monday in there, right? Mondays, a couple Saturdays. So that's pretty useful information. But maybe now what I want to do is I want to count those. So in order to count them, I'm going to need to do something similar to what I did before. I'm going to need to group it, but this time, instead of grouping it by the winner, I would need to group it based on the day of the week, right? I need to figure out which ones of these races are on the same day of the week. I no longer care about the winner. So I'm going to take the same information and I'm going to say group by, again, column 1. Right? So if I do that, now I can see there's Monday, Saturday, Sunday. So it looks like there's no races on Fridays. Every other day of the week seems to be represented. And we only see 1 race name identified here. So that in itself is maybe a misleading thing. So let's just get rid of that. And so what I can do now is I can actually count, right? So I can count the race name.
Yes.
So at this point, we have all the races, and then we can, if we wanted to see which was the most popular, then I could take that same query, and I could say, well, you know what? Let's order by column 2, and we'll do it descending. So if we look at that, then we can see the most popular day to have a race is on a Sunday, followed closely by Monday and Saturday. So that might be interesting in terms of, from a business decision, when should we host our next race? It's always important to be able to see some historical trends in data. So let's see what else we might be able to ascertain from our data set. Okay. So one of the things we might see is, well, we need some new sponsors. So we might look through this and see, well, who sponsored us in the past? So it looks like the company Dickies, AAA has sponsored things, Samsung has, the NRA, the National Rifle Association's sponsored some NASCAR. Hard to believe. All right, so let's say we want to see how many times Samsung, for example, has sponsored us. So we could say how many times has Samsung been a sponsor? So if we do this, we could say select. Take a look at our data first. And really, if we want to see where Samsung has sponsored, then even through my natural language, I said the word where. If we want to see the races where Samsung was a sponsor, so I'm going to have to say the race name. If I said equals Samsung, okay, so those, if I did this, I see that 0 rows are returned. It's a valid query. There's nothing invalid from a syntax perspective. However, it returned no results. And the reason is, if we look at the names are like the Samsung / Radio Shack 500. None of the race names are exactly equal to Samsung, and that's what this equals means. It means it's exactly the same. So what we want is, situations where Samsung is in there. So we can use the like command in wildcards. So like doesn't need an exact match. So now we're basically saying there can be any number of characters before Samsung, and there can be any number of characters after Samsung, but as long as Samsung's in there, it'll return the record. So if we run that, now when I look, although some of these are Samsung Radio Shack, Samsung Mobile, it's returning all the records. So I get 11 rows. So now I can see Samsung's been a sponsor 11 times. If I wanted to have that as the only output, then I could just say count, and I might say as right. So I could actually just return a number, and that might be interesting. Again, depending on how you're using this. So if I had a front end, it was interfacing to my database, so I wasn't really allowing my users direct database access. There might be just a query that says, well, how many times was Samsung a sponsor, or how many times was Radio Shack a sponsor, right? So that all the user would do is they would type into a web form a name, and then I could return this, to whatever the user typed, right? That'd just be a variable. So let's look at this. Right? So there's lots of opportunities here. You can start to envision how a front end might interact with the database. So that was quite a bit about the select statement. So let's go back to our original table here. So we have all these tables that all these commands that structure tables, create tables, drop tables, and alter tables. And then everything over here were the main commands that we need to look at for handling our data. So inserting rows or records, updating rows or records, that's where you're changing or modifying an existing row in a table or rows in a table. Delete removes entire rows. It doesn't remove individual cells or fields. If you wanted to remove an individual cell or field, you use update. If you want to delete the entire record, you use delete. And then select is our tool for getting information out of the database. I hope this overview was helpful, and look forward to seeing you in class.